Hello and welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to be sharing with you how to cut a stylish monostrap blouse. If you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button. So first I've gone ahead to mark up my basic measurements, which includes my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, shoulder to waistline and top length. So after that I went ahead to mark my shoulder divided by 2 plus half. My shoulder divided by 2 is 7 inches plus half, making it 7.5. I'll come down by 1 inch to mark my shoulder slope, place my ruler, and I'm going to go ahead to draw and connect. After I'm done doing this, I'll go ahead to mark my basic neckline for this pattern, which is 3 by 3 inches. So I'll go ahead and place my curved rule, connect my neckline. And after I'm done connecting this, the next step is to find your armhole or your chest line, which is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. And I'll go ahead to mark what I have on the shoulder back to make sure I have a straight line. Now I'm going to connect and I'll be drawing out my chest line. So I'll go ahead and I will divide my armhole into 2, fold my tape, and I will mark. Now I'm going to come in by ½ inch from that point, go down to my chest line, and I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, which is 33 divided by 4. I have 8.3. Connect from that point to the midpoint of my armhole and to the shoulder part. I'll just go ahead to outline this pattern. I'll be leaving my neckline because I'm also going to alter that part later. So I'll go ahead and mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, which is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5. I'm going to mark it at the bust, under bust, waist and top length. So after marking from my under bust, I'll go ahead to extend that same measurement, which is my bust band divided by 2, or your nipple to nipple divided by 2. I'll go ahead to connect. Now I'll be taking it 1 inch that intake on this part. So if you're a plus size or you have a bigger bust, you're going to be using 1.5 inches. Now I'll connect from my under bust to my waist and my top length. Repeat this also at the other side of my pattern, and I'll use my marker to outline this to make it more visible. So I'll go ahead, connect from my bust down to the under bust, and I'll be repeating this at the other side, and I'll also use my marker to outline this. So next, for this pattern, I will divide my shoulder into 2, because when looking at this pattern, you will notice that we have a shoulder dart from the bust. So I'll just go ahead and connect this. That is after dividing my shoulder into 2 first. From the shoulder point, I'm going to go out by 2 inches. So let's say if your bust is bigger or you're on the bigger sides, you can use 2.5 inches. So I'll just go ahead and connect this all the way down to the bust part of my pattern. So now that 2 inches you took out, you're going to go ahead to mark it back. This is to replace whatever that you took out at the shoulder point. And remember, when you're cutting this out, you're just going to blend it or cut out the the shoulder dart at this point. Now I'll just connect this back to the armhole this way. So after I'm done connecting this, I'm just going to go ahead to use my marker to outline to make it more visible. Then I'll go ahead to shade out my dart to indicate that I have a dart at that part of my pattern. So next, we're going to go ahead to mark our body measurements. I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4. So from my chest line, I'll just mark about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and I'll be using the dart at that point as a guide, and I'll mark it and add my sewing allowance. At the under bust, mark your under bust circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and add your sewing allowance. At the waist, I'll be using my actual waist circumference divided by 4, measure the 2 inches dart intake, replace, and I'll add my sewing allowance. So I'm going to go ahead to the top length and I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and I'll add my sewing allowance back to the pattern. So you can use 1 inch, 1.5 inch, or any desired sewing allowance of your choice, but for this pattern it's just a pattern illustration. So I'll just go ahead and I will connect this out. So I'll come down by ½ inch from my waistline and I'm just going to connect this to my top length. So for my top length, I added 5 inches away from my waistline. So I'm just going to blend this in a bit more so that I'm going to have that roundish effect at the lower part of my waist. So this is what I have after I'm done marking out, and I'm just going to go ahead to cut this out, and I'll be replacing or retracing all this dart intake on this side on the other part of my pattern. So this is what I have, and now we are going to go ahead to alter the neckline. So from the neckline, I went in a bit by 0.3 inches, and I'll blend in my darts if you're cutting this out, or you can just go ahead to cut out the dart. So from my shoulder, I marked about 6 inches, and I'm just going to create a curve then before getting to the 6 inches that I have on that point. So now I'm just going to measure about 1.5 inches from the center of my pattern, and I'm going to connect. So looking at the thumbnail, you notice that this point from the center to the other side went up a bit. So I'll just go ahead to blend my dart at this point, and I will connect for it to match what I have on the other side. Measure what you have at the shoulder to the lower part of that side, because you might be needing that when you're drafting out the sleeve part of your pattern. So this is what the upper part looks like. So I'm just going to go ahead to use my marker to mark this out to make it more visible for you to see. So if you notice on the pattern, you have like boning channels at the center and beside the joining at the bust pan. So I'm just going to go ahead to mark that to indicate that there is a boning channel at that part of your pattern, and I'll just go ahead to repeat the same thing at the other side. So now I'm just going to go ahead to cut this out. So while cutting out, also take note of the bust dart. You can go ahead to fold it in, or you can just cut it out. So at this point, if you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please don't forget to hit on the subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up. If you have any question, leave at the comment section. So also remember to cut out a strap for the upper part of this pattern, which you'll be attaching while you're sewing your dress. So for the back pattern, I've gone ahead to mark out all the basic measurements just like we did for the front. And now the first step I'm going to take is just to go ahead to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2, which is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5. I'll go ahead to mark this all the way down. After that, I'll just go ahead and draw a straight line, and I'll be marking my dart intake of 1 inch at both sides, and I'll just go ahead to connect this and also connect the other side of my pattern this way. So I'll just go ahead to place my ruler and also draw out the lower dart of the pattern. Next is to mark my body circumference, which is my bust circumference divided by 4. Add my sewing allowance. There's no dart there. So I'll go down to my waistline, mark my waist circumference divided by 4, measure the dart intake, replace, and add my sewing allowance. At the top length, I'll mark my hip circumference divided by 4 and add my sewing allowance. So I will just go ahead and connect from the upper part to the lower part of my pattern. I'll come down from my waist about ½ inch just like we did for the front, and I'll be taking that ½ inch all the way to the back because the back pattern is straight, and I'm going to cut that out. After cutting out my pattern, I'm just going to go ahead to unpin it, and I'll open it up. So I'll go ahead and place my front pattern on it. So I just want to make sure that the shoulder point is exactly like what I have on the shoulder at the front is the exact thing at the back. So remember, we took out a little from the neckline, so I'll just go ahead and mark that also for the back, and I'll just go ahead to connect all the way down. So after I'm done doing that, I'm just going to measure that same measurement at the other side of the shoulder in front. That is, we came down by 6 inches. I'll go ahead and do it at this point also. Now I'll connect my pattern from the center to that end. I'll go ahead and I'll cut out this part of my pattern, place it together because this pattern has a lacing bar, and I'll go ahead to pin it first. So for the lacing bar area, I'll be using 2 inches, and I'll just go ahead and mark this all the way to the upper part, and I'll draw a straight line at that point. So the 2 inches is not a constant. You can make use of 1.5 or 2 inches or any measurement of your choice. I'll make a mark to indicate that that is my lacing bar area. So I'll go ahead to cut and also trace out the neckline so that it will match at the other side, and just as we have at the thumbnail. So after cutting this with what I have, so for the basic sleeve part, I went ahead to mark 1/2 inch as my joining allowance. I'll go ahead to mark my sleeve cap height, which is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. I'll go ahead to mark. So I'll go ahead to measure my shoulder to elbow point. Then the lower part will be serving as my wrist, and I'll go ahead to label out my pattern as elbow point and sleeve length. So next I'll mark what I have round my armhole. My armhole measurement is 16 divided by 2. I have 8 plus 1 inch, making it 9. So I'll just draw a freehand sketch. This is a freehand sketch method of drawing out a sleeve. So I have 9 inch there. So after doing that, I'll mark what I have round my elbow divided by 2, add my sewing allowance, and also repeat that at the sleeve length. So I'll just go ahead and I'll connect this all the way up, and after connecting that, I'll mark 1/2 inch on top, which will serve for the joining allowance. So after that, I'll just go ahead to cut out the rest of my pattern. So this is the basic sleeve for one side of the dress. So to cut the off shoulder sleeve part, so for the off shoulder, I've marked 1/2 inch, which will serve as the starting point or joining allowance. And remember, our off shoulder sleeve came down all the way to 6 inches, and from there you'll be marking all your basic measurements, but I'll be adding 1/2 inch to mine, so I'll be using 5.5. Go ahead to mark my shoulder to elbow, mark my shoulder to sleeve length. So I'll go ahead to mark that and I'll label it out. So after that, I'll be marking what I have round my armhole divided by 2, which is 16 divided by 2. I have 8 plus 1 inch. Mark what I have round my elbow divided by 2, and I'll be adding 1 inch to it also. Go ahead to do the same to the sleeve length. Mark what I have round the sleeve length divided by 2 plus 1 inch. Now I'll go ahead to connect and mark, and I will cut out the rest of my pattern. So after that, I'll measure what I have from the front part of my armhole to the back. So that is what you'll be marking at this point. So mine is 8 inches divided by 2. I have 4, so I marked. So after marking that, from this point, I placed and marked about 1.5 inches because I used 5.5 inches. So my chest line is 7.5. So that 5.5 plus 1.5 will give me 7 inches. So that's why I used 1.5 inches at that point. So after I'm done cutting out, this is what I have, and we have come to the end of today's tutorial.